Well, I'm delighted today to be speaking with Simon Gray, who's the Head of Business Development at BVI Finance. We're here in East Hotel in Miami, getting ready for our event later on. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you very much, David. It's a privilege to be back here after at least a year.
So we're looking forward to a great networking dinner tonight. You're also with us in London over the summer at our PCD networking dinner. You're looking forward to the event this evening?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we've been involved in these in Hong Kong in the past as well. And as you expand globally, I'm sure we'll be there because we tend to operate globally anyway. But there's a huge benefit to these things. And I often think it's best to actually do business face to face. And in these relatively intimate groups, it's ideal. So we're delighted to be here and supporting the PCDC.
Fantastic. So for those who've not had the chance to meet you at one of those events, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about your role at BVI Finance.
Sure. Well, my background is a mixture of regulator and regulated. And I think that it's quite useful because you see it from the practitioner's perspective if one is in a regulatory position. Because it's always important to actually understand the mood of the market and what works and what doesn't work. But BVI Finance is a global operation. We operate in many different continents, and we do so in a way that really tries to represent the entire facet, every facet of the BVI's financial services industry, which is very, very diverse. We've got nearly 90 members, ranging from lawyers, accountants, insolvency practitioners, bankers, investment houses, funds. Pretty well you name it, we cover every permutation of financial services. And it's an operation which began about 20 years ago and continues to expand exponentially. So I'm happy to be an ambassador with a wonderful team.
Great, and there's lots of exciting things happening in BVI. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the headlines that our intermediary audience should be aware of.
Sure, well certainly the COVID business was distracting for the entire world, but we didn't really miss a step. We managed to operate electronically very, very swiftly. We also utilize ambassadors we have with our various member firms around the world. And even if we couldn't physically be somewhere, our ambassadors represented us very, very effectively. In terms of focus, we continue to be very innovative. And perhaps one of the growth areas definitely has been the element of funds, but also business companies. We also see increasing activity on the trust side. And perhaps I could share some stats with you. A good example is Capital Economics. In a report they did, that actually indicated that 2.2 million jobs globally are beneficiaries of BVI activity and BVI structures. In addition to that, a couple of other stats, if I may. There's 15 billion of taxes generated annually for governments globally, and BVI International Mediated Investment Business represents 1.5 trillion globally. So we're rather proud of that because even though we're a relatively small archipelago in the Caribbean, we do think big and operate globally.
No, very interesting and punching well above your weight there. I mean, it'd be interesting to get a flavour of the sort of feedback you get from the onshore professionals in places such as Miami or London about their experience working with BVI professionals and BVI structures. What is it that they tell you about why they like working with the jurisdiction?
Well, I think it's a variety of factors. I think one of the advantages is continuity and stability. I think also the fact that we have a common law system which is very familiar to many parts of the world. That familiarity gives a degree of comfort. We also have a very robust commercial court system. I mean, we have about 230 commercial lawyers, which statistically is a pretty high number for a comparatively small place. And they're all people who've qualified not just within the BVI system, which you need to do, but perhaps as importantly, in highly credible jurisdictions such as the UK, the States, Australia, Hong Kong, etc. I think the other factor is we have an international arbitration centre, which is proving very successful. That was set up a few years ago. The US dollar is our currency, and although I'm a very proud British patriot, I do look with concern at how we approach parity with the dollar, so I'm glad I'm paid in US. But the great thing about the BVI, we think globally, and that means that we are very, very welcoming to other jurisdictions. And we also have a degree of humility because we recognize competition, we respect competition, but in no way will we allow ourselves to become complacent. If someone seems to be doing something slightly better, we want to find out what it is that they have that we might improve on. So we're always looking to learn. We listen and we observe, and we hopefully learn from those advantages.
And you mentioned before that you didn't miss a beat during COVID. Work continued. I mean, how do you find that it's impacted the way professionals operate their services? Do you find that people have come to the island now and building their careers? How do you find the sort of work-life balance of those colleagues you're working with in the jurisdiction?
Well, I often say I've got the perfect work-life balance. My wife and I live with our cats on the beach, which meant that lockdown was not too inconvenient. And I wasn't allowed on the beach because that was a public place and banned, but we live in a resort, so we're allowed to walk around that. And I do remember dealing with our PR agents in London and pointing out that I lived on a beach, which caused a degree of envy. And I then reminded one of them that they have a nice flat near the Albert Hall, and he said, I'm looking at a pile of bricks, I can't actually visit it. But it is very important, because I think one thing COVID has taught us is not only the value of electronics and the media, but also perspective. We don't always have to jump on an aeroplane. You can actually transact business highly effectively, non-face-to-face, just through Zoom or Teams or whatever. And whilst we find culturally there are certain parts of the world where face-to-face continues to be far more important, Asia is one of them, to a degree Africa, Arabia certainly, even those jurisdictions have now recognized the degree of compromise. That means that we are able to be far more savvy, far more fleet of foot, and far more cost effective in how we operate. So at the end of the day, we think there have been more advantages than disadvantages in spite of the tragedy of COVID.
So looking at the BVI economy, which sectors are driving the jurisdiction forward? Well,
the sectors are fundamentally two, financial services and the tourist industry. Both of them very advanced. Tourism inevitably suffered because of an inability of people to travel globally. But one of the strengths, or one of the many strengths that the Tourist Authority has is we are one of the most desirable places in the world in terms of the yachting industry and also scuba diving. And one of the beauties of a private yacht is you are private. So even in the COVID debacle, people were actually coming over and sitting on their yachts. I mean, it was relatively risk-free once you actually managed to get there. And to be stranded on a yacht in a beautiful part of the world isn't as bad as it sounds. In terms of financial services, we are one of the most powerful offshore financial services jurisdictions. And you know, there are some wonderful competitors not far from us and also globally. I think the key strength is that we never ever get complacent. We always look to try and innovate and to advance and to learn, and if an error is made either by ourselves or by another, we will look to learn from that very quickly. And one of the most important initiatives we've had is to always engage with the industry, because we recognize their intellectual brilliance, and it is much easier to roll out a new product if it's already been battle tested. So we have many full and frank discussions. We set up numerous working groups. The working groups tend to be based on regional focus, such as Africa, Asia, Latin America, North America, and Europe, but also in terms of new innovation. And I think one of the most interesting and dynamic elements has been the advance of digital and crypto. So one of our most active working groups has been the Digital Asset Working Group, and we brought in practitioners from the States, Europe, Hong Kong, and obviously many in the BVI. And that allowed us to benchmark with what other jurisdictions are doing, learn from what they may have done right, perhaps learn from what errors they may have made, and then to work out which model might best advance what we represent. So we are very, very cautious but very tenacious in the entire approach we take towards innovation.
And has the fall in crypto valuation, the so-called crypto winter, led to a reduction in work that professionals are doing on the island with the asset class, or how have you seen that unfold?
Interestingly, no. I mean, we still see a lot of activity in terms of the business company side, with often exchanges being established. They may operate in different places, but they are legally based within our business company network, of which we've got nearly 400,000. We also see more and more activity on the fund side, particularly, I think, with the Incubator Fund, which we created back in 2013 really to benefit the rapidly growing hedge fund industry. But what we've seen is an unexpected dividend has been their ideal for entrepreneurs in the digital crypto space. And so the incubator funds are doing extremely well. Some of those mature into the approved fund structures, and some larger practitioners or more ambitious individuals who want far more shareholders, they will actually go for the private fund structure, which doesn't have the limitation of, say, 20 shareholders that an incubator fund would have. So they have grown. The other element, which is very important, is that we tend to operate commercially for corporate vehicles and fund vehicles from gestation to birth to nurturing, ultimately to perhaps, well, eventually perhaps death or resurrection. So we do have a very, very advanced insolvency group of practitioners. And in fact, Insol are hosting their conference on one of our islands next month, which is a credit to our practitioners. We also have a very, very capable group of litigators. And so when there is a correction in the market, which was bound to happen, it's probably a good thing because it shows how a product matures. Not everything is going to be successful. And so what we are able to do is to help with the perhaps administration, conceivably the liquidation, hopefully not the insolvency, but we can do that as well, and conceivably the litigation. So it's really from cradle to grave. We cover every permutation of corporate life and death.
So you mentioned innovation and the incubator funds. I mean, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about what's specifically different about them. Is it that they're quicker to bring to market, a lower cost of entry point perhaps to administer? Perhaps you could set out why they're different.
Sure. Well, we have 5 or 6 different categories of fund. By far my favorite, and I think probably the most popular, is the incubator fund. And there's a number of reasons for that. You've heard of the expression 20/20 hindsight. Well, I use the expression 20/20 foresight. This predates my arrival, so the credit really goes to the various working groups that put this together. But the 20/20 foresight, it means that you can have a minimum investment of $20,000 US. There is a limit on the unit holders or shareholders of 20 investors. And finally, the absolute limit of each individual incubator fund is $20 million US, so 20/20. The other advantage is they're extremely fast to set up. So a credit to our Unitary Financial Services Authority. It's the FSC. It's also one that does not require the appointment of an investment manager or a custodian or an administrator, which means there is absolutely no way a retail operator should even think of investing in something like that. So it's ideal for a budding entrepreneur, and normally you've got 2 years before you have to consider what the next step is, and the next step often will be to convert into an approved fund, and that can be extended by an additional 12 months to make it a 3-year or 36-month process with the express agreement of the Financial Services Commission, the unitary regulator. So they're highly successful, not just for hedge funds, but also for the digital crypto space, but actually for entrepreneurs generally. And then there are other options of funds as well, but that seems to be by far the most popular, certainly the one I'm most fond of.
And does demand for that product come from global investors? So is it, I mean, I imagine North America is huge opportunity for people to set up in BVI to run these funds, but is there a geographic spread across the world? Or
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we do operate absolutely globally. By far the biggest revenue stream still comes in from Southeast Asia, primarily mainland China through Hong Kong and Singapore. In aggregate, probably about 41%. 21% probably in from Latin America. Europe is a smaller amount, but still relatively healthy. North America is growing, and I think there's huge potential there. One reason I'm in Miami is, as an Anglo-Brazilian family, we see this as the perfect place. You've got Latin American, Brazilian culture, music, food, but North American efficiency. So for us, it's paradise.
Fantastic. And we're all back out on the road now. The conference scene is back in business, back in full swing. You were down at STEP LATAM in Panama recently. Are you enjoying being back on the road? And is there anything coming out of these conferences now that you've found interesting? Any trends that you're observing?
Well, it is wonderful to be doing it again, and my air miles, thankfully, are recovering. They're looking bad with a deficit for a while. It is good to be back, and STEP did a wonderful job keeping going during the lockdown. But I'm a little bit old-fashioned. It's a bit like the dinners we're attending here tonight. It's doing something face-to-face over some fine wine and some fine food. It's never going to go away. So it is great to be back, and long may it continue.
Great. Well, Simon, great to talk to you today. I look forward to seeing you this evening.
Thank you very much, David.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.